As Dr. Marks shared before the break, project management's important because you really need to track how well you're doing and your progress over the entire year. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm William Shih. I'm the Deputy Race Director. Most of you already know me, but just a little bit of history from who I am. I first raced in this competition back in 1997 as a student. I helped start the Northview High School solar car team with some of my friends from high school. And we found this competition in the nascent days of the internet. We were looking for some interesting challenge. And then at the same time, my co-captain decided that, he was on the East Coast, was at the Smithsonian and saw the GM Sun Racer. And so from that, we were inspired to come and build a solar car. And so we built a solar car in '97. The team carried on until 2001. I graduated after '97, and so that was my end of my racing days as a participant. Then in 2005, 2004 really, my friend from church decided that he wanted to be part of the solar car challenge. He was a high school student. He heard me come back and help out the solar car race every year, and he says, I want to build a solar car. And so we started up a new team in 2005, and off we went. I took another year off the race in 2015 to help advise the new iteration of the Walnut team. And so from my experience, it's really both as a participant and also as a solar car advisor. So I'll talk you through a bit of project management and what we do. So why do we need project management in our solar car teams? Well, our solar cars projects are very complex, right? We talked about the different teams that you need. You're going to have some people who are doing mechanical aspects of the car, some people doing the electrical parts. You have your solar array inputs might be a different team. You have your business aspects and the fundraising, and they all are associated with one another. It takes a long time. So you may have come from an experience of like robotics, FIRST Robotics, BEST Robotics. These are like 6-week projects, right? You just go, you get started, and you just build really quickly. Well, when you get to something like a solar car, where you're talking about like 12 to 24 months of work, you need a bit more ability to track your progress over time so that you can recover from any issues that you have along the way. And then it requires development of new skills, right? You need to make sure that by the time you need to put something together, you have people who are trained to do those things. And so project management answers these things. How do all these different teams work together? How do you ensure that the project is done on time? What are the milestones you're going to put in place to do that? And how do you know that you have all the teaching resources allocated so that it's just in time for you to build it? So project management basically breaks up the project into smaller pieces that you can then quantify and say, each task takes this amount of time. And I'll walk you through what that looks like in a real solar car project. There's a roadmap for how you get from here to there. You flesh out dependencies between teams, right? If you're building a solar car, you can't really work on your steering and suspension until you have a frame to hang those things on. Those are the types of dependencies that you're going to need to identify and then allocate in your schedule. You need to set trip points for evaluation. If you say, I'm just going to build a solar car and at the end, by July, I'll have a solar car, most of the time you'll probably not be there in time, or you'll be building in the parking lot or building in the garage while you're at the race. These project management skills will help you then keep track of, hey, am I falling behind? Am I ahead of schedule? Can I pull things in? And then ultimately to prioritize work on a week-by-week basis. There are some critical things that you need to do along the way to accomplish the schedule that you want to accomplish, right? Major milestones that need to happen. And in project management speak, we call that the critical path. It means that if any of those tasks slip, your entire deadline slips. There are other tasks that are not part of the critical path, and if those tasks start to slip, it may not slip your overall schedule. So you want to focus and have priority on those tasks in your critical path rather than in some of the things that are off on the side. So if you're a new team, you'd be going, well, I've never built a car before. How the heck do I build a calendar and build a project management schedule if I haven't done so? And so we actually have a project planning calendar resource for you. This is a link, and all of these presentations will be uploaded to our workshop page so that you have access to them. You can go and get this project planning calendar, but ultimately it says this, right? If you're starting a completely new team, in September when you start coming back to school, you'll want to organize your team, do your initial prep stuff, and then in October and maybe November, you're gonna start designing, and then ultimately starting to buy your long lead items, things that come international, things that you need to buy from Alibaba that is gonna take forever to ship to you, things like the ARL power trackers from Australia, that might take time. So you wanna start purchasing your parts, and then you're gonna spend most of the winter prototyping and building, right? You've got your design, now you gotta work it out and say, hey, does this work? Can I build a car from this? And then hopefully by April, May, June, you are testing. Recognizing that this is the ideal world and most teams don't get to do that, we do encourage you that as you plan out your schedule, that you are trying to complete by March or April so that you have time to test out your car. Back in 1997, when I was putting the car together, we actually did finish building the car in April. And we took it out on the road. This was a road race, and so we wanted to get some practical experience. So we took it out on the road, and for those in the Southern California area, you'll know that we basically took it up to Victorville and then headed west towards Lancaster. And it's like, the high desert, no one's out there. And so we just drove the car along the way, and we got testing data. And ultimately, the car ran. But we thought that it didn't run sufficiently well to really do well on the road. And so in April, we decided that we're going to redesign the entire car. We chopped the car up completely in April. We had all the parts, so all the electrical systems and everything, we had all of those already purchased. We just need to rebuild the car because it was too heavy. And so we ultimately chopped everything up, redesigned it, welded it all back up together, finished the car in the parking lot of the hotel that when we were hosting it back at the hotel, and then we raced and we got second place. And we were at the time, the metric was an average speed, and we were less than 1 mile per hour slower than the winning car. And so why I tell you the story is, if we didn't have the ability to essentially fail fast and then recover, I don't know how well we would have done. I mean, the car would have run, but not very well. And so, leave time to test so that when you get to July, you arrive to the race prepared. Okay, so in terms of program management, and by the way, I'll take an aside to say, this is something that when I started the Walnut team, we got the captains of the team to do, right? This is not something that your advisor should be like, okay, here's what you're gonna work on every day. Sure, that could happen, but it's better if you take ownership of your project and say, okay, how do I build this schedule out, right? First off, you have to break it up into your major systems, and then break it up to your subsystems, right? Your mechanical team will be responsible for the frame, the suspension, and so on. And then you start looking at the dependencies between those subsystems, right? We say that you really want to have your suspension before your steering so that you can figure out, like, if you put your steering geometry in place, then you try to put a suspension piece in there and it's right in the way of the steering components, then that doesn't work, right? So there's different dependencies that need to happen. So note those dependencies, and then you break things down further along the way. So what does that look like? We basically look at a 4-month build schedule, and you target major milestones, right? By the end of December, I want a chassis. By the end of January, I want a rolling chassis where I can steer and I can push the car. Maybe it's not powered by a motor yet. And then by February, we'll power the chassis, and then we add solar to that. If that was your goals, and I would recommend that's a fairly logical way of putting a solar car together, then you start going, well, how do I get a chassis together? You got to do some initial framing. You've got to put a roll cage and roll bar together. You got to put your front axles and seats together, and then eventually do your mounts. And then you'll start looking and saying, well, I can't really finish the suspension mounts without the axles. I can't really work on the steering without where the driver's going to be, so that I have a steering column, and I need to make sure I'm not interfering with the suspension mounts. So you start noting those dependencies so that you can jot those down in your schedule. Note the other thing about this, right? Even though my target is to have a chassis by December, I'm actually working on electrical stuff, which has nothing to do with the chassis, in December. Why? Why? At the end of February, I wanted a power chassis. So I need to get this done in time. Well, this is dependent on this is dependent on this is dependent on that. And so you basically have to work backwards and say, hey, I may have to start some of these tasks early so that by the time that I need it over here in February, all of the previous prerequisites are done, right? So you got to start thinking with the end in mind and then working backwards to get to completion there. So once you have that high-level schedule and those major tasks, now you have to break things down even further, right? In terms of steering, it's not just do steering, but you have a set of things that you have to do, right? You got to figure out where it's going to be. You got to install your front wheels and your rack and pinion, and so on. And the way that we work is we have this high-level schedule. We have these milestones put in place, but then we keep breaking that down into the place where you can identify a particular task that you can complete in a particular workday, right? And so for us, you start breaking them down and say, okay, maybe I can fabricate the steering rods in a day, right? And so you put that on the list. And so what happens is this drives what you work on a particular day. Our team met on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. It was a club, essentially. And so we would have a whiteboard that lists all of the tasks of the day. And here they are. We were building 2 cars at the time, the electric solar car and the advanced division car. And so these are all the different tasks that we had to do on that particular day, right? Most of these things you can do within a particular day or within a work period. And the nice thing about that is when you assign these to different students, or as you assign them to different team members, when you finish them, you could just cross them off. And you get that sense of accomplishment, like, I've done something today, right? And if you keep that momentum, then you get really enthusiastic about actually building your solar car. So you have all these tasks and you planned it all out, but ultimately things happen, right? Things break, like we had to redesign. You might look at some design that you implemented and say, well, that's not gonna work. So you have to account for rework, account for unplanned tasks, right? So your project management is basically a living schedule. As you plan your ideal schedule out, and then you have to start inserting these unplanned tasks in there, which will slip your schedule, right? This is why we tell you finish early, because you're gonna start eating into that contingency time along the way. And so you're gonna continue to revise your schedule. Some things might take longer than expected, and so you're gonna have to deal with that. And so ultimately, when you plan tasks, what you really wanna do is be aggressive with your schedule duration. Sometimes you might go and say, oh, that task will take 4 hours, typically. Well, don't plan it out for 4 hours, plan it out for 2. And make it a challenge. So we always go and say, hey, can you do it in 2? And we work really hard to try to meet that challenge time, and then maybe we'll slip to 3. But it's 3 hours that you spent working on that task, not 4. And so you can start bringing in your schedule if you can be sort of motivating each other to challenge yourselves to finish faster, right? And so just giving you a little bit of experience, both as a professional engineer and having advised different teams, and you'll hear from Will next about his experience managing a project and his other cars. But ultimately, you need to find a way to plan out all the tasks that you have and break it down to a place where you can have individual tasks that you can cross off, right? That'll allow you to make sure that you buy all the parts that you need for the day beforehand, that you've trained all the team members to know how to do that task before that task needs to be done, and that'll keep your project on schedule. And that'll identify dependencies that you have, make sure your parts are all there at the right time, and then you can start looking at contingencies, and ultimately, you'll have your car done on time and tested. So hopefully that gives you a little glimpse of how you plan out your solar car. Anyone have any questions? All right, with that, question? Yes?
When you say account for slippages in the schedule,
yes.
Does that look like when you have a schedule written out, showing the task with extra time, or is it just adapting the schedule as?
So how do you account for slippage? Ultimately, in project management, you want to have your final milestone be much earlier than you need it, right? For example, we race in July. Can you finish your schedule, have a complete solar car by May? And so as tasks slip, your end date will slip, but you've built in some contingency there to account for that slippage. Other questions?
Thank you, Will.